Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Stefan from Business Review, and I will be your host. It is our pleasure to have QPS with us today, who will be presenting this webinar titled COVID-19, a Phase 1 Studies. Today's guest speakers are Brendon Bourg, and QPS Vice President and General Manager, and Robin Lee, QPS Project Management Specialist. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly welcome you to our webinar platform On24. You notice that this webinar is browser-based, so if you disconnect for any reason, please just click on the link that you received via email to rejoin the session. In order to ask questions, you can then submit them via the questions widget. Just type them into the box and click Submit. We will allocate some time at the end of today's session to address any questions or thoughts that you may have. Please use the yellow Help widget if you require any assistance, and keep in mind you can move, resize, and maximize any of the windows in front of you for a better view of the slides. But now, please allow me to welcome Brendon Bourg.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Again, my name is Brendon Bourg. I'm the Vice President and General Manager of QPS Missouri. We're located in Springfield, Missouri, which is southwest corner of the state of Missouri. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Myself, I've been part of QPS now for a little over almost 26 years now, from 1994. I've enjoyed working on many clinical trials for the FDA. I've learned a lot through the years. Recently, we as a team have learned some incredibly niche skills, and those are in regards to COVID-19. We will discuss some of those skills and some of our lessons learned here throughout the webinar. And again, please, if you have questions, send them in the question box, and we'll get to them after the webinar is over. This webinar is going to discuss COVID-19. Everybody on this call, the reason you're dialing in is because you want to hear about COVID-19 and our risk mitigation and what QPS Missouri and QPS Global did to get our studies back up and running. So we're gonna start it off by talking about stopping the business and what we did to do that. We're gonna go into rethinking and risk mitigations, and then we'll go into restarting our clinical studies amid the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sorry. So first of all, I'd like to introduce QPS. We're a global CRO. We support discovery, preclinical, clinical drug development. We provide services to many pharmaceutical and biotech clients worldwide. We have many global locations around the world in North America, Europe, and Asia, with our headquarters in Delaware. Today, we're going to concentrate on QPS Missouri and its risk mitigation, but I do want to emphasize that our risk mitigation was not done just by QPS Missouri. It was done in a global fashion, so we used all of our resources, all of our experienced leaders and our experienced staff to come up to a conclusion in order to stop, to rethink, and restart our clinical studies for our sponsors. We're going to move on to QPS Missouri. This is where we are located. This is our facility. We're a 240-bed facility. We're one of the largest in the United States in terms of bed space on one campus. We sit on 5 acres. And like I said earlier, we've been running clinical studies since 1994, and we're approaching now 2,000 FDA-regulated studies. I want to really shout out to all of our friends, colleagues, and clients that are on the call. I'm really excited to see everybody on. We miss you, and we're going to work very hard to get these vaccines approved so that we can see you once again and say hello and shake hands as we used to. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to stop about stopping phase 1 studies, stopping the clinic. It was a very difficult process to handle, so we're going to go into that. First of all, 2020 has been an incredible year, starting in February. It has affected everybody. COVID-19 has affected everybody, mostly not in the good ways. We've lost friends. We have friends that are sick, family members that are sick. We've lost family members, and that's a terrible thing to happen. And we all know the day that we were affected by COVID-19. we were following it in February, we were following it in March, but when did it really affect you? For me, real quick, it affected me. I was on a quick vacation on day one of a vacation in Colorado, which is about a 12-hour drive from Springfield with my family. We pulled into the resort, the ski resort, and were promptly told to leave the premises as COVID-19. They were shutting down the slopes, they were shutting down the resorts, and they were potentially going to barricade the town. It almost sounds like a movie scene. It felt like a movie scene, so we did exactly that. We left Colorado, we drove through Kansas, and promptly quarantined because we were in an area that had positive COVID cases. So what we need to talk about is now Springfield and the Greene County, Missouri. So, you know, as soon as I got back from this 2-day vacation, I promptly contacted our CEO, and we discussed, you know, what do we need to do in terms of COVID-19 in the business as well we have it. So the first question we asked is, what is COVID-19? What is it, and what does it mean for QPS? Obviously, there was a lot of questions in there, you know, hundreds and hundreds of thoughts and ideas of what it really was. So we had to get down to the granular fashion. And then it was asked, why would Missouri even care about this? In the Springfield area at the time, I think we had 8 cases in early March, and those were all in nursing homes. So why would we even consider thinking about stopping business? Well, then we thought about, what is the biggest risk? Well, there's a lot more risk by not stopping. That's PR, both with your clients and your local vendors and your local community. Your industry, the industry, if you keep your doors open, you can really get a negative impact with positive cases. Your state and your local governments will really look down on you if you don't have a risk mitigation in place, you know, to make sure that you know you've covered all your bases. And then the FDA, of course, which we all follow that, you know, ICH and DCP guidelines for. We decided, you know what, we've really got to make this the smartest step and the safest step forward and close our doors. So what did we do? We immediately stopped all of our future work. We went to all of our sponsors immediately and said, listen, I know we've got your backlog. I know we've started recruiting. We have your protocols written. We're ready to go. But we need to stop all this future work and start planning for risk mitigation. The sponsors that we had ongoing studies, we discussed how we are going to complete those studies the safest manner possible. And those are many conversations as well that we had with them, and also reading the FDA guidances on what to do there. At that point, we closed our doors. Now, is that really possible with phase 1 site? You know, with all of our freezers and our pharmacies and everything that goes along with something that you just can't close your doors and turn off your lights. So what we did is we did a staff closure only. So our doors, while they remained locked, we identified a core team to be the essential core team to manage all of that equipment. We're going to talk about stopping continued here. So one thing that really was a popular word there at the beginning was an essential business. Who was essential? What does essential really mean? It turns out that in Missouri, QPS Missouri, our clinical site was in fact essential. The local government came to us and said, you are essential. We want you to keep practicing research. We want you to work on COVID-19 coronavirus cures. And so that is what we did. We worked on a risk mitigation, and then we decided, you know what, we're going to make this essential. So we decided, is it for the greater good? Yes, it was, because risk mitigation, we get that in place, we can start working on the vaccines. Then how can we help while we're trying to get our doors open? And we offer testing for the local government for COVID-19. Is there a potential that we could open our doors for hospitals in case a pandemic overruns our hospitals? We did not do that. We didn't need to, because we have 2 incredibly powerful and very smart hospitals here in Springfield, Missouri. So we were lucky. Well, we're lucky enough to have them, so we didn't have to do that. Then we had to go to our vendors. We negotiated and we suspended a lot of our services. And the best thing about it, our vendors were incredibly supportive of us as they were going through the same thing. And knowing that we were going to be back, it it was an easy decision for many of them. For upper management, the SLT, it was a big hit to us by closing the doors because our capital expenditures that we just put so much hard work into building the growth of QPS. Well, that got stifled. We had to stop. But in a good way, it was a time to stop and rethink, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. Staffing. Obviously, the staff were furloughed. We had to furlough many of the staff. We didn't have work. It wasn't safe for them to be here. The best way would be to furlough. So we identified the core team to be on site for business continuity, to maintain our facility and our freezers and our pharmacies. At that point, we worked with the state of Missouri and the city of Springfield to make sure that the stimulus package with unemployment was there to help our staff keep their heads above water while they're furloughed, which is very interesting and a whole story in itself. And any employer could talk about that for days, but that's a different conversation. And then there was a mitigation plan around retention and losses. So we have one of the best HRs here in Springfield that you can get, and we really put our heads together to really find a way to keep the part-time and the full-time and our PRN people from saying, hey, I've got to go find work. So we did the best we could to keep them on board, and we were successful at the end. I think we lost 2 people at the end of the day out of our 85 employees, so we did a really good job. I think we're going to pass it over to okay, sorry about that. We're going to talk about rethinking everything here. So again, this isn't a phase 1 unit that it was January 1st. Middle of March, it's a brand new phase 1 unit now. So we had to rethink everything. So do we want to reopen? I think the decision was yes, we had to. The government wanted us to. Some of our clients wanted us to start again. So we had to do it for the right reasons. So in order to do that, we had to use all of our global resources and expedite it. What that was is coming up with a global risk mitigation. We used our global site heads and their strong staff to come up with these guidelines. And these guidelines were not only built from our own lessons learned, our own sites procedures, but we also used the CDC, the WHO, the other global authorities, and our state and local health departments to come up with these guidelines, as well as OSHA, and making sure that we were following all the gear and all the PPE requirements to keep our staff and our volunteers safe. So step 1 was the most important step. And we could go through all the steps, but I think there were probably 300 to 400 different steps that we went through to create this. But step 1 was the most important, and it was to create a team to develop this risk mitigation plan. This team developed a plan to keep the COVID-19 from spreading throughout the site. We had solid QA on staff, our full-time staff that really jumped in and helped us out with this, and our site heads were incredibly determined to keep their staff engaged and to make sure this risk mitigation plan was solid. One thing about QPS that a lot of people don't know is that we have many people that have been here for a long time. I've been here for 26 years. Robin's been here for 22 years, and globally, it's our turnover is very low. So we're very, very humbled to have the vast experience and each other to hold accountable. So we're lucky in that way. So those are the folks that we used. When it came down to local risk mitigation, once the global risk mitigation plan was in place, we were able to tweak it slightly to look for our IRBs to allow them to approve of the plans. Our local QA would then approve, our IRBs approved. And once we were through that process, here come the training materials for our staff. Our informed consents are written by our experienced coordinators around COVID-19. Everything came into play with a lot of oversight by each and every person. Then we jumped into COVID-19 testing. That was such a big what at the beginning of this, and it still is today. What is the right test? What is the test that should be used? Should we be doing it on staff, volunteers, vendors, visitors? that was a big push for us, and we were lucky enough to have a local lab here in Springfield, just down the street, that was able to get us that validated COVID-19 PCR swab with a quick turnaround that allowed us to jump right into in our volunteers. So we had to rethink our capabilities. What is different? What works? We can't run like we used to. While we have 240 beds, we can't put 200 people in the clinic over a weekend. That's just not possible anymore. The number of subjects per clinic, it went down from 60, it went down to 12. We had to look at the different types of drugs that we would never look at before. Does it drop the immune system to a point where it's just not safe for the volunteers to leave the facility? We looked at our protocol designs. A two-way crossover study with a washout of 7 days would be a full confinement to keep them confined to the clinic. There were many different steps that we took. And those are all in our risk mitigation plan of the 6 steps and types of studies that we followed. And you have to understand that those change day to day, and it's good that we have a strong team in hand, that we're constantly changing our risk mitigation to follow the COVID-19 spread. Another thing that we have advantage of, we started on this prior to COVID, but then we saw a change of where this negative pressure room would go. And so now we have a negative pressure room that we will test all of our volunteers for COVID-19 prior to admission to the facility. So what this does is that keeps the airflow consistently going out of the facility and not being circulated back into the facility like a normal office or normal hospital would be like. So it's a very unique attribute for our clinic, and it's a great opportunity for us and our sponsors and our volunteers to not only run different types of studies but be safe at the same time. I'm going to pass it over to Robin. Thank you, to talk about restarting.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Robin Lee, and I'm a project manager, an on-site project manager for QPS Missouri and QPS Global. I've been with the company for just over 22 years. I have worn just about every hat imaginable in the company. So I have worked in recruiting, I've helped out on the clinic floor, I've done data entry and QC, and now here I am in project management. So just to start things off, what we're going to be talking about here is the actual restart phase, where, we're actually restarting the studies during the pandemic. So to start off that discussion, let's talk about our virtual world, and welcome to the virtual world. When we restarted after the initial closure, the offices were closed to basically non-essential employees, personnel. And we all know that virtual meetings are nothing new. We've hosted everything from WebEx meetings to GoTo meetings to every type of meeting before COVID. For SIVs, to discuss ongoing conduct with our sponsors and our clients. But now we're seeing a new need to do more virtually. We've had to overcome the travel restrictions that are in place to ensure that we can still continue to grow as a company, as well as assist our clients and our sponsors so they can continue to monitor the trials that they need to. So we've set up virtual rooms, and with the support of our IT, we've ensured security is in place for those rooms. So this has allowed us to complete pre-study site visits, qualification visits, even audits virtually. And we've also been able to set up those virtual rooms for monitors and CRAs so that they can review items, including source data verification virtually, without the hassles that we've all encountered when we've been traveling. We've even gone so far as to give tours of our facility with our phones and our laptops. You'd be amazed what we can do when we put our minds to it. Our clients and sponsors and CRAs, of course, are welcome back to our facility, and we look forward to seeing you all again. But when we do host visitors on our site, we do so with the requirements that are in place now. So those visitors are all supposed to follow our local health regulations as well as our risk mitigation plan. Specifically for social distancing, wearing a mask, we do ask questions to ensure their current health status is in check, we take temperatures, and we make sure that they're aware of all of our requirements and all of our restrictions. So when we start talking about the plan, the risk mitigation plan, and how it actually works in reality. That's a different story altogether. So the big question of whether or not we're ready yet, I think that's a legitimate one. The planning is just brainstorming, right? You brainstorm ideas and then put those ideas together into some form of a strategy. You go from the risk mitigation planning stage to the next phase, which is basically putting everything into action. And that was not an easy task. And I have to give it up to the team and all those site heads and QA and HR personnel that actually got everything that we needed to be able to do it. So we needed to make sure that we shared our plans with everyone, from our internal teams to our staff to our business development group, project managers, and most definitely to our clients. As Brendon stated, we needed to ensure that these new processes were followed, and we wanted to make sure everyone knew what they were. We wanted everyone to understand that we were making safety a priority over any type of revenue. We wanted to reinforce that during our talks with our staff and our clients, before we started reaching out to our volunteers, we had everything ready and in place. If we weren't able to conduct a study because of the class of the drug or the project design, we were honest about it up front. We worked with everyone internally within QPS to discuss what was realistic and what was feasible. We worked with our vendors to ensure that they fully understood and would comply with all of our risk mitigation plans. So moving from that, of course, planning to reality, the planning stage, are we really ready to begin? You know, we keep going on that route, and we look at it as we found that our staff and our clients were fully on board. They were fully on board with our risk mitigation plan. Even with the new processes and the training that we needed, everyone understood this was for our safety and the safety of our volunteers, our team, our entire company, the community, when they came in, adapted to the situation. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, is something we utilize with every project now. We have the leadership in place with strong support from QA, from human resources, from management, and everyone, including our community. It's been great. Regardless of the climate we live in, whether it's an anti-vaccine or anti-mask, when you walk through our doors, you know that our risk mitigation is not optional. It is not up for debate. The safety and well-being of everyone takes precedence, and that is the most important thing. So there is always a strategy for everything. I mean, everything. And we have meeting after meeting to discuss all of our strategies. Even when the planning phase is over, it's not over. We meet, we strategize, we meet again, we plan. We discuss every detail of every project to ensure it's safe, it's feasible, and we can do it. You plan for every contingency, but still, something is going to happen. You have to stay ahead of the next curve. Keep up to date on the ever-changing guidelines put in place, and they do change every day. You have to adapt to every situation, and you have to be flexible. We have been communicating more with our staff on the clinic floor and our sponsors since this pandemic occurred than we ever have. We keep everyone in the know about any issue, any process changes. We ensure the risk mitigation that we have is part of our everyday life at our facility, ensuring social distancing and the use of face masks. And we know we can't be afraid to ask those hard questions. When we talk with our clients, we ask them, do you want to collect this test information? Do you want this information collected as part of the data? Do you want it in your EDC? Or do you want it to be a site-level documentation only? We should ask, do we want the volunteers to know if another subject tests positive? We could what if forever on the questions that should be asked and can be asked and have been asked. But you can't be afraid to ask those questions. When it came to restarting, I would say that recruitment during this pandemic has been probably the most challenging part for us as project managers, because it's dealing with being able to explain why a study doesn't fill. And that has happened. unfortunately, when we first opened, I will tell you that I did not miss my days in recruiting at all. When we restarted during this pandemic, recruitment was so challenging on several levels. First, in explaining our safety processes to our volunteers, and of course, working to practically coax them into our facility and out of their homes. The fear of the coronavirus was and is a real thing, justifiably so. But trying to reassure them that they were still okay to come to our facility, that we were making safety our first priority, and that it would be obvious to them if they would just come to our site. It was difficult. Then, of course, handling the financial portion of it. The financial hurdles that we went through in trying to match our stipends to what a volunteer was making from unemployment benefits alone, not to mention the impact of the stimulus package. We had to reevaluate our stipends and discuss these issues with the IRB. And in the end, I believe that our clients and the IRB understood the challenges we were facing. So many of them agreed to raising stipends to compete with what our volunteers were getting from the government. Then it was on to, of course, teaching our volunteers. It's almost like training, but on volunteers versus staff. So we had new processes in place with the risk mitigation plan. There were so many questions. There were pre-screening questionnaires. There was pre-screening temperatures. There was going through a list of questions with each subject on each call before they ever made it to our doors. And then when they made it to our doors, it's isolating each subject, going through the questions again, taking the temperatures, making sure that everyone was wearing a mask at all times, ensuring social distancing. We needed to have our clinical space ready, dedicated, like a clinic that was dedicated just for screening purposes. So we did that. We took one clinic, we used it strictly for screening purposes, ensuring that all subjects or volunteers stayed socially distant from each other. We had to ensure that they understood that they would be seen by appointment only, which was completely different from our norm. Our recruiting team did an amazing job with this. Even with all the obstacles in the beginning, they just kept trucking forward and doing their best to make sure that we could fill our studies. So in working with the risk mitigation in a clinical setting, that was also challenging. So when you go from the planning phase, again, we plan in advance more than we ever have. And we do dry runs on studies. We have discussions, again, strategizing. We make sure our risk mitigation plan is followed, and it's been working. We have been utilizing all the tools that have been put in place to make that work. We have those strategy discussions, when to test for COVID, when not to test for COVID. Do we do it at screening? Should we test for COVID at check-in? Or should we do both? Should we wait? Should we test during return? We go through all of the discussions in advance. But even with that, remember, you'll always have those surprises that pop up. So what we have learned is that giving the PI the capability and flexibility and getting approval from our sponsors to allow them to make those improvised decisions on when to test and if we should test based on symptoms or based on study design, that has been key. We can't plan for every single detail. In the clinic, on the floor, risk mitigation takes on a whole new meaning. To see it in action with staff garbed in the PPE, like Brendon said, is truly like a sight straight out of a movie. And it is just a different atmosphere altogether. We went from what we call mass screenings, where we had groups of people come in and we would complete screenings in a 2-hour time frame. We've gone from that to doing screenings by appointment only and throughout the entire day. What took us 2 hours now takes us 2 days. And it's all to ensure safety. We went from clinics full of volunteers, up to 60 subjects, to 12 to maybe 20 to ensure that we had the social distancing in place. And the key really is to keep up with everything. You have to be adaptable. You have to be flexible to our ever-changing world, to the constant change in guidelines. And it really, really helps to have a strong team. So that being said, let's go on to the actual conclusion. What's next for QPS?
Well, thanks, Robin. Yeah, I think, what is next? That's the thing that we don't really know. What we have done is we have taken our clinic, taken our sites, taken our bioanalytical labs, and we have transformed them into a different way of thinking of running the business. For now, this is how we're going to run the business, and we're going to run the business this way until the foreseeable future. I put in here, will it ever go back to normal, to pre-COVID-19 pandemic? I don't know. What is normal in reality, and what lessons did we learn in this process in our strategies to make this a full-time gig? We've fixed a lot of things that we have found errors in and the way we ran a few of the things, and I think one of those was on business travel. So if you talk about business travel, and our CEO talks about this as well, is that, business development and the operations team and others that would travel around the world, that, the amount of time spent on the road in airplanes, in the hotel rooms, booking your Ubers or booking your cab, traveling, trying to get to the site for an hour meeting, how much time was wasted in that travel, when a phone call could have solved all that with high quality videography that while it might be an investment, could have really played that role of a face-to-face meeting. I think that's one area that we've really seen a lot of progress. Our business development team, God bless them, they would be on the road 60 to 75% of the time traveling, and that's a strain. And when 75% of your time is traveling, 50% of that time is in an airport, or in a hotel room, not being productive because you just don't have all your tools in front of you. So I think we've really seen a lot of that, and it shows with the amount of work that we're seeing come through the pipeline and the backlog. It's amazing, the amount of work that the BD are bringing in. It's just absolutely mind blowing this year, and I congratulate them on that. You head back to the clinic here. Like Robin said, our TCONs, our site initiation visits, our IMs, and anything in between. While we would use those tools available to us, we weren't experts on those. But we have become experts. And in doing so, your WebExes, your GoToMeetings, your Microsoft Teams, your Zooms, whatever they are constantly updating their software now, because there are so many more people using them, and they're becoming much, much more user-friendly. So, we are becoming so good at that. So we're using those tools available. We can have longer teleconferences with clients because they don't have to travel. They're not tired. They don't have to get on a plane to get back home. They can stay as long as they like. We can stay 2 to 3 hours over because we have that time now to spare. On the site here, we have a lot of monitors and a lot of auditors and that landscape. We have an entire facility dedicated to offices just for that group, and we love having them here. But with with their travel restrictions, a lot of them can't make it. So, we had to, again, use our tools to make sure that they were getting everything they needed, timely, clear, concise, yet following all of the HIPAA guidelines and all of the FDA guidelines that are set forth in confidentiality, et cetera. So, we have bought software to make sure that happens as read-only. We've bought software that we can download on FTPs that are unlimited in the megabytes that we can scan in, with paper copies, and it's just been a lot of hard work, but it's actually working out for us. We would have a full week to week. We would have half to a full room of CRAs in our room monitoring studies now. While we are allowing CRAs site under risk mitigation and auditors, they don't need to be there either as long or at all, because we're able to virtually help them audit, which I know they like. They like as well. Much more productive than being in an airplane. Again, what is the new normal? Day-to-day operations. The coordinators and the clinical team. I know that they feel this. Their hours for that key staff, they've gone up potentially by a third. Only because our studies now, you can't run, like Robin said, a group of 60 in 1 minute interval blood draws, so you're done dosing in 60 minutes. That's not social distancing. That doesn't follow our risk mitigation. So what we have to do now is break those into different, smaller cohorts, social distance them, which adds to the hours of the team. So as management, you really have to take a hard look at that and build in your part-time or your PRN staff to help alleviate those hours, and listen to your team, and really, make a decision on where that needs to go. One thing that makes that happen is our sponsors. Our sponsors have been incredibly receptive on some of our pricing, because we can't run studies like we used to at a certain pricing pre-COVID. We had built our efficiencies back in the day. We had 26 years to do that. Within 3 months, we had to go to a totally different way of running studies. And it's more expensive. And our sponsors absolutely understood that, and we appreciate that. And while we are cost sharing a lot of those with them, it's been really good for our return sponsors to help us out with that. Our coordinators look at these protocols now every day, and they look at that and say, we can't run a study based on this template protocol written in 1999. It just doesn't work that way. So for QPS, it's been really good to have our medical writing team understand the operational aspects and changes that need to happen in that protocol. So for medical writing, they have to adapt quickly, and they have to understand the processes. There are a lot of medical writers out there that are kind of stuck and solid, just stuck in their ways. And
template land.
in template land, but that's not the way it is anymore. We're not templated anymore. So that's incredibly key to, for across the board, pharmacokineticists, looking at a protocol in a way that they didn't look at before. Looking at group effect for any generic studies, and understanding that, that's got to be understood with them and the FDA, that must be a different change in terms of how you're running studies. It can't be the way of a group of 120 anymore. That's just not possible. So, and just going back to the relationships with our sponsors and our vendors and even our volunteers and our staff. While we can say that face-to-face is key to long-term relationships, what I absolutely do, we need to understand, or is it? So we need to understand all of our isms and all of our client isms, and really use that to our advantage to make sure that they are in the know at all times. That's how you can build relationships, and that's what we're doing. Again, the BD and the project managers such as Robin are on the phone more than they've ever been, and that is so key to keeping those relationships going, and not just waiting for a face-to-face meeting next week. It's on a call. It's on a Zoom. It's today. It's overnight. We don't live by the clock. We live by the clock by the clinic, but in terms of this face-to-face, we don't live by the clock anymore. It's overnight if we're talking to our colleagues in Taiwan. If we're talking to our teams in the Netherlands or in India, we have to be flexible with their times, and that's very important. And again, virtual tours. We cannot invest, and we did not invest in in what I would say the cheap equipment to get by. When you're doing a virtual tour with a sponsor, or when you're really trying to keep those communication lines, you have to have the best and the fastest internet. You have to have the best quality, videos, WebExes, anything that does the best, that doesn't stop, that doesn't pause. That's so important. That the little bit of frustration that you get when you have a drop phone call with a family. Imagine you're across the pond, as we say, and WebEx locks up because your internet isn't fast enough to download. That's just not an okay. That's just not okay for QPS. So we're really investing in that in that virtual idea. So, but what lastly here, what I want to say is that none of this would have been we could have done none of this without our team, our global team. Not only them to believe in our risk mitigation, to build the risk mitigation, but to understand the risk, believe in the risk, and take that risk with QPS. And also our vendors. Our vendors are on game with our risk mitigation. They have to follow it or they're not our vendor. And it's the same with us. If we don't follow their risk mitigation, they drop us. And we completely understand that. Our volunteers. Thank you to our volunteers. They believe in us. They have signed back up. We have more volunteers signing up for studies than we have in years. And I don't know if that's because of COVID or if that's just because they trust us, they believe in QPS, and that's but that I believe it's the latter still. And lastly, at the end of the day, we are creating a new norm, at least now what we believe is the new norm. And our priority right now is safety. We will not put safety as a backdoor to revenue, like Robin said. And all I can say is that as a leader of the QPS team, I'm really excited to be part of this trend. I believe this is a new trend. I believe it's going to be in place for a long time, regardless of if COVID goes away, which we hope it will very soon. But I'm really glad to be part of this team blazing this new trail. So, I thank you everybody for joining this webinar. And again, if you have any questions, you can type them below, and we can discuss those now.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Just a reminder to the audience, you can submit your questions via the question widget. Just type them into the box and click submit. But it looks like we have some questions coming in already. Our first question for today is, how does a negative pressure room benefit your clinic for COVID-19?
That's a great question, and that's a question we get quite often, not only from our sponsors, but from the volunteers and even the staff. The curiosity to watch this very large room and area be built. The original purpose of the room was for respiratory products, PK products, to keep, as we're dosing, we don't want the recirculation of the product through the facility. That was the original idea, which is still the process. As COVID came along, we saw that as an advantage as well. Keeping our staff, keeping our facility what we call a clean facility, we want that to be key. So that negative pressure does exactly what a hospital's negative pressure in ICU would do. It would take all of the air that's in that room and it circulates it directly outside. It doesn't exchange throughout the facility like your house would do, or your every couple hours where it would exchange. It would let it air out every once in a while, but then it would keep recirculating. Ours does not recirculate. The air gets pumped in from our filters. It gets pumped directly outside. So anything that's in that facility will get sucked out. So that is an incredible question, and we're very, very, very lucky to have that in place.
Thank you so much for that answer. Our next question is, do you think any of your new processes will be retained after the pandemic because they're better than what was being done before?
I would have to say yes. I do see that we will actually keep a lot of our processes in place. Our goal has always been safety with our subjects and our volunteers, but never to this extent where we're maintaining social distancing and wearing masks. I think a lot of the virtual world that we live in will definitely be retained. I can see a lot less travel occurring for monitors and CRAs to our site. I can see a lot of things being done virtually moving forward. So yes, I do see a lot of our processes staying in place.
Thank you so much for that answer. Our next question for today is, have you had any volunteers test positive during a study, and how did you handle that?
We have had volunteers test positive, whether it be at screening or during conduct. And each situation is different. Each situation is handled differently. We test for some studies at screening, at some at check-in. It varies with each trial. But when it comes to a positive result, obviously we notify the subject immediately. The volunteer is told immediately of the result. And then, of course, our local health authorities follow that subject and do contact tracing. So again, we are not a diagnostic facility, but when those results come back, we ensure that volunteers are notified immediately. And from there, it goes back to the hard questions of whether or not to notify other subjects and volunteers, whether or not to notify all staff. Staff is notified. On the volunteer front, since all the volunteers are isolated until COVID results come back, and that subject that tested positive is released immediately upon notification, there's no need to notify the participants otherwise. Hope that helps answer that question.
Thank you so much for that answer. And just a quick reminder to the audience, you can still submit your questions via the Q&A widget in the top right corner of your screen. But on to the next question. How many subjects have you had test positive for COVID-19?
So that's something that we track very closely as our, on our metrics, not only for the our county, which is Greene County here in the Missouri area, but also for our own metrics for our sponsors. That's a question that our sponsors ask for day to day. What's our positive rate? So I keep those pretty close. So currently, the Greene County area is seeing about a 3% positive rate, and I believe it's around 350,000 people in the Greene County area, in the Springfield area. Currently, we are at just right at 1% of our volunteers have tested positive COVID. Some of those are at screening. I would say probably most of those were at screening. We've had a few before they check into the facility while they're quarantined to come up positive, where we have our risk mitigation at that point to release them from the study, and then we have our follow-ups with them, whether it's AEs, SAEs, or so on. But it's I think we're right at it's like 1.1% out of all the volunteers that we've tested for nasopharyngeal swabs.
Thank you so much for that answer. And our next question for today is, what type of COVID-19 testing are you doing on your volunteers?
Currently, we're doing the nasopharyngeal PCR test. We do actually have a vendor here locally that does our testing for us. And they do all of the rapid results back. It's real-time PCR. And those results come back to us typically within 6 to 8 hours of the actual test. So it's a very rapid turnaround. And it's actually gone really well. All the supplies are in place. All the PPE gear is in place. So the real-time PCR testing, where we are just testing to see if they have active infection, works very well for our site, especially with the time frame that we have to actually conduct this test and get the results back.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that answer. And just a quick reminder to the audience, you can still submit your questions via the Q&A widget. But on to our next question for today. Can you provide examples of how certain monitoring or auditing activities were conducted remotely? For example, ASDV, verifying eligibility criteria, drug accountability, etc.
Certainly. We have actually, like Brendon was saying, we purchased a platform that we utilize to set up virtual monitoring rooms. Those virtual monitoring rooms allow us to upload data, whether it be data for auditing, such as our SOPs, or for actual monitoring, SCV, source data verification. We can actually upload all of those items to a secure platform so that people can view those items as needed. It is very secure. It has a two-stage access, password, username, password, of course. You can set up pins. You can actually set up, it's very user-friendly, so it's adaptable, which is very good. It is set up by our IT team, and our IT team has been wonderful during this pandemic. The virtual monitoring room works really well for several different things. That is one item that I do believe we will certainly continue with moving forward.
And I would like to comment on the drug accountability portion as well. We do allow CRAs and auditors on site. They go through questionnaires just like the volunteers do about their temperature and their their experience with the coronavirus and where they've traveled, et cetera, the CDC questions that everybody has. So when they arrive at the facility, they go through questionnaires. The temperatures, they wear the mask, they wear the PPE gear just like anybody else does, and they are definitely allowed to do drug accountability with the pharmacy team. There are no restrictions on that part of it except for the risk mitigation. So I hope that answers that question.
Thank you so much for that answer. Our next question for today is, do you have the capability to perform both PSR and serology testing for COVID-19?
That's a good question. We do. Here in Springfield, we have a lab and our hospital that can do the PCR nasopharyngeal swabs, which is the best route at this point. We get a quick turnaround on those. Serology is also done here in Springfield. While it's a 24-hour turnaround, it's still a validated process, which is great. Sponsors, we do utilize those on some studies, mostly our coronavirus COVID-19 studies, our vaccine trials. However, we also utilize in our home office in Delaware, they have also validated the serology and the PCR as well there. So, we have several options that, and several different routes that we can go to get that testing done for us.
Thank you so much for that answer. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. If you didn't get your question answered today, keep in mind they can be answered at a later date. That just leaves me to thank Robin and Brendon for what has been a great presentation, and to QPS for sponsoring this event. To the attendees, you receive an email shortly telling you how you can access the on-demand version of this webinar, or you can access this through our website, which is www.business-review-webinars.com. We look forward to sharing more webinars with you, so please do keep an eye out on the website just mentioned. Thank you once again, and I hope you have a fantastic day.